I walked into the concession stand at the swimming pool I worked in when I was in high school. I was opening the concession stand that day. I had closed it the night before. I went about the tasks of setting up, and I got to the nacho station, which consisted of a square box that held a container of nacho cheese. The box heated up the cheese. The container was not empty and in the box, so I assumed it would be in the refrigerator, which is where we put it when we had leftover cheese so it could stay cool over the night. It also wasn't in the refrigerator, so I went about my regular other tasks. At that point, my manager came in and called me into the little tiny office next to the concession stand and said, "Did you close the concession stand last night?" And I said, "I did." And she said, "Can you answer a question for me?" I said, "Sure." And she said, "Do you have any idea why the nacho cheese container would be in the ice machine?" And I said, "Well, of course that's where it is. Because as I got to the end of the day, the story that shaped my working there was that I wanted to get home. And I couldn't put the hot nacho cheese straight into the refrigerator, so I had to get it cooled down so that I could get it into the fridge. And the easiest way to cool it down, stick it in the ice machine. Now, she's the manager of the pool, and she knows that that ice is going to get put into cups that go into people's sodas, and it should not have the nacho cheese container in it. So for her, it was totally absurd that the nacho cheese would be in the ice machine. But I share all of this to indicate that we were living in two different stories. Her story was the responsible managerial story that would never put the nacho cheese in the ice machine, and my story was the 17-year-old boy working in a concession stand who wanted to get out of there and needed that cheese to get cooler. So what I did seemed absurd to her, but it was a different story that was shaping how I acted. As the women come to the tomb on that dawn, they are shaped by a story. It's an age-old story that says when you die, you get buried, people grieve your loss, life rolls on, and you don't come back. So as they get to the tomb, they encounter these two men in dazzling white who have a different story. Their story says, "Hey, he's not here. Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" That question to them makes total sense. To the women, it may have sounded totally absurd, because their story wasn't that they were looking for the living among the dead. They were looking for the dead among the dead. Two different stories. Only one of them can be true. Either death is the final answer, or God's vision of reconciliation and raising Jesus from the dead so that we all might be made new is true. Only one of them can be true. They can't both be true. We are narrative people. We are shaped by our stories. We are shaped not just by our own stories, our family stories, but by our culture's story. And our culture's story is a complicated and deep one that has lots of facets to it. Some of those facets are that we are individualistic. We are to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and work harder and get out there and just get after it. Our cultural story is one of progress, always rolling along, and if you can't keep up, you get left behind. You can find all sorts of small towns that are dying, and even the city of Detroit, a whole city has been left behind because it wasn't keeping up as the world changed. And we don't look at that necessarily and lament it. We say, well, just work harder, try harder, get your act together, change, catch up. That's what we do. And it looks at our whole culture, when you look at that story, it looks like we have to do it on our own. And as we get into life and as we go through life, we find that it's not just cities that get left behind, but it's people that get left behind. And so often our only solution to that is just to try harder. The self-help section at the bookstore is vast. And if any of those books worked, there wouldn't be as many of them, would there? Because you would find the one that worked. Now, they work for a time. We try diets, we try exercise programs, and some of them we stick with, some of them we don't, all of which we're trying to bring ourselves to life. Because I think when we get up every day, we all want to have life. We want to be whole, we want to be well, we want to have joy. But as we get shaped by a story that says, take care of yourself, try harder, work harder, we get shaped by a story that so often has the answer to violence as violence. We get shaped by a story that leaves people behind and just says, catch up. It starts to get hard to figure out where we are going to find life. That search for life begins to get elusive. You can imagine then that we could find ourselves with those women in the tomb, wondering why our story isn't working. We came to find the dead amongst the dead. We've tried again and again to trust in people, to trust in ourselves, and failed. And then come these two guys in dazzling white that say, why are you looking for the living amongst the dead? It may sound like an absurd question, because we hear a story every single day over and over on TV, from our neighbors, from ourselves, that we have to make this happen, that we are the ones that get ourselves to life. As we gather on Easter, we hear this different story. We hear it in all of the gospel stories as it goes. Where we might say, work harder and try harder, Jesus tells Mary to sit, Martha to sit and just listen. Where we might say that wealth and piling up wealth and building up investments so that we can take care of ourselves, Jesus criticizes the young man and says, give everything you have away and follow me. Criticizes another guy for building bigger barns. As we come and we carry grudges, Jesus comes and says, no, you need to forgive people. You can take our story and just line up all of its pieces, and you can take the gospel and line up all of its guidance that Jesus gives us, and you will find they are at odds more often than not, and only one of them can be true. So as we gather on Easter, the question that I've been wrestling with all week is, why are we here? Because today we will have a whole lot more people than we often do, and we all are here for probably different reasons. Common reasons for some. Some are here all the time and you can't help but be here. Others are here because you feel like you have to be. Some are here with family. Some are here maybe because you're hungry for life and the other story isn't filling you up. For whatever reason we gather here, we come to this place and we hear a different story. The only thing I can come up with is to tell you why I'm here. I'm here because the other story did not work for me, and it still doesn't work for me, and yet so often I run down that path of relying on myself and relying on my own efforts and relying on the story that we live in all the time. But every time I come to this place, I hear a different story. It's a story that says, no, it's not you that brings life, it's Jesus. And it's not just in this place, though. Over my time as being a pastor, I've never heard anyone come to me and say, Pastor, I sat down, I read the Bible, and now that I've read it all, it makes total sense, and I've decided that I believe all this stuff. That's never happened to me. What has happened is my own personal experiences is that people have experienced resurrection. They have experienced what it means for the other story to be the true story. The story that seems absurd, the story about searching for the living amongst the dead, that story being true. And when you experience that story of resurrection, it reminds you that this other story that shapes us and that we live in all the time doesn't get us life. And that's what has happened to me in my life. I have seen resurrection. I've seen it all kinds of places. I have sat with someone my own age and talked with him who grew up a slave, who grew up abandoned by his family. But as he grew and as other people took him in and invested in him, he began to care for and forgive those people that enslaved him. Now he's a father and he runs a small business and he invests in whole communities of people. That is a resurrection story. I have seen people in the deep depths of addiction yanked out of that, not because they sat down finally and decided that that wasn't working and that they should try something different, just yanked out of it into a new place where they are made whole and well. Not like they were before the addiction, but a new person that has grown out of that. It's a powerful thing to see. I've seen communities of people who the world has left for dead rise up new. Not the same as they once were, but in a new place, carrying with them the memories of the pain and the struggle and the death that was amongst them, but now living with life and energy and zest. And all of that resurrection I see never gets held close, because that's not how resurrection works. The women go and they tell the story. The disciples think it sounds like an idle tale. But Peter runs back. He runs back to see, and he's amazed at what he sees. And when you're amazed at what you see, do you keep that to yourself? No, you have to go tell someone, because you can't help but tell. And that's what resurrection does to us. When we see it, we go, wow, I gotta go tell somebody about that. And that's how this good news of this other story gets shaped in the world. We are the church. The identity of the church at its core is that we are witnesses of the resurrection. If you listen to this Easter gospel, the only thing they do is tell the story. At the very first, they see it, they hear it, They are amazed at resurrection, and they go tell the story. Our task is to get out into the world and look for resurrection, because we know it's there. We know that is the true story amongst the two that are always competing for our energy and our attention. So we go out trusting that it's true, often getting dragged into that other story, but with eyes open that God can indeed be making things new. God does it in our lives. Jesus comes amongst us all the time and makes us new. The reason I come here every Sunday, the reason that I love this story is because it constantly keeps me grounded and constantly draws me away from where I would otherwise go. Every day these waters of baptism remind us of that. Every time we gather at this table, it reminds us of that Jesus was raised. He is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
May we be blessed to be amazed by that and to go out into a world that needs to hear that, to see it, share it, and live with the joy of that amazement every day. Amen.